Today's episode is sponsored by the Rising Tide Mastermind. The Rising Tide Mastermind is where people just like you get together every week to help each other with issues. Let's face it, issues are hard, so why start from square one when somebody can tell you what they've done with a similar issue? If this sounds like something that's interesting to you, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind to see if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore, the host of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And Nation, once again, this is one of my favorite shows because this is a Pinks and Blues episode. I know we just had one of those 2 weeks ago. I love them so much. I wanted to make sure I brought you another one before the end of the year. And who can believe it is at the end of the year? We've got 1 week left, and then we're in 2025. And as you know, I like to look at the end of the year and the beginning of next year as how do I plan to make the next year so much better? So you might be tired of hearing about it, but here it is. Here is my plug for my favorite planning and execution book called The 12-Week Year. I love it so much. It's one of the foundations we use in the Rising Tide Mastermind. And in fact, right now in the Rising Tide Mastermind, all members are giving a review of what they have accomplished this present year. And they're giving us a preview of what the next 3 years are going to look like. And then when we get to quarter one of 2025, they're going to meet with their accountability partners and they are going to decide what are the goals that they're going to achieve in the next 90 days. See, the way 12-week year works is it splits up every quarter, so we treat it like a year. And if you've ever looked at why December is always the highest sales month, it's because people are really working on their sales because there's no more months left and they've got to get it done. So the premise of 12-week year is that we look at this quarter as an entire year. And then if you look at a 3-year period, so what we try to do in the mastermind is what are we going to create? And we look at 5 different areas over the next 3 years. And now what's a 1/12th piece? Because 12 quarters equals 3 years. What's a 1/12th piece of what I need to do right now in this quarter that allows me to achieve that goal I said that I want to achieve in a 3-year period? And then we hold each other accountable to getting that done. But the cool thing about adding the mastermind concept with that is we're not alone getting it done. Every member of the mastermind wants their other mastermind members to achieve these goals, so we're helping them. Maybe there's something that we've done in the past that we can share with them so they don't have to figure it out. Maybe they can start at step 3 instead of step 1. Maybe them starting at step 3 allows them to realize that maybe I missed a step when I did it 2 years ago, and now they returned whatever procedure I had all polished and even better. So the next time we do it, we can get there faster. That's the whole purpose of the mastermind. But one of the tools that we use is the 12-week year. And that's a tool that you can get very easily. We made an affiliate link for you. And you can go to scalinguph2o.com/12. So 12-week year. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/12-week year. And that's also on Audible. Now, I love books on Audible because we are busy driving from account to account, and we're now able to read again because we have Audible. Somebody is reading to us. And I have learned a couple years back from one of our guests that I can train my brain to listen faster. So I listen on a higher speed than 1.0. And that allows me to read more books. Now, next week, I'm going to tell you how many books I've read this year. And I'm going to do the regular 2024 year end wrap up of all the accomplishments that we've had in this podcast and things I want to share with you. So you'll have to wait until next week to hear how many books that I've read. But I'm going to tell you, the majority of them are all on Audible, and it's because I can speed up the rate and I can listen to it faster. Now, I will say I couldn't do that all at once. I had to incrementally go up. And when I listen to new readers, new authors, I have to incrementally go up so I get to a comfortable position so I can listen to them. And then I really am able to retain the information. So that might be another technique for you to read more. So many people I talk to say they wish they could read more. Our job is not going to make that easy for you to read more, but there's enough time in the car where you can listen more. And take it from me, I am able to remember the books just like I read them. So if you want to try Audible, we have an easy way for you to try Audible. We have an affiliate link. You can go to scalinguph2o.com/Audible. And that will get you a free book and a free month to try out Audible. And maybe that's the 12-week year that you get as your free book. And then you can listen to that at 20 times speed. I don't recommend that. That was a joke. I also recommend that you have a physical copy of 12-Week Year. There's a lot of charts and different guides within that book that I reference on a regular basis. So, Nation, we got 2 weeks left. Make them good weeks. Make sure you are trying to figure out what 2024 was trying to teach you so you can just make 2025 the best year yet. Nation, one of the things you should be looking at the end of this year is how you're going to plan next year. And by going on our events page, you can start planning different things that you want to do during the year so you can slate that time for it. You don't have to worry about double booking. And let me tell you, when you start going to training seminars and conferences, not only do you get to devour new information and see information and hear information in a new way, you get to meet people. And one of my favorite things to do now is to go to a conference because there's so many people out there in the Scaling Up Nation, and we get to meet personally at that conference. So maybe one of these conferences, you and I will be there together and we can meet. By all means, if you ever see me at an event, please come over and say hi. I would love to meet you. That's one of my favorite things. And I just can't believe that so many thousands of people listen to this podcast. And I just want an opportunity to say thank you for that. Well, mark your calendars for March 11th, which is World Plumbing Day. And the World Plumbing Day, March 11th, is set in our calendars for many years now. We've had that since 2010. And this is celebrated by people all around the globe. The international plumbing community, as represented by the Council, has a vital role in promoting the link between good quality plumbing, health, and environmental sustainability, and increasingly economic prosperity. So this is a day all about celebrating plumbing in the world. So mark your calendars for March 11th, and we'll be sure to maybe do some special celebration to help you with that. Think of all the things that we do with water. Wouldn't be able to do it without all the plumbing that's out there. Also on March 11th through March 15th, Amsterdam's Aquatech is taking place. And this is all about processed water, drinking water, and wastewater. And they have over 800 exhibitors and over 200 speakers. This is a huge show. And if you are going to be in the area, I definitely recommend that you check this out. If you're in Tampa, Florida, March 16th through 19th, you'll probably want to check out the 40th Annual Water Reuse Symposium. We've had some people on from the symposium to this podcast. So if you want to learn more about this year's symposium, go to scalinguph2o.com/events. And then finally, the 2025 Texas Water Conference being held in Houston, Texas, March 18th through 25th. This is the 30th year this conference has been held, and it's the largest regional water conference in the United States, bringing together all water quality engineers, treatment professionals, plant technicians, scientists, government officials, regulatory agency personnel, manufacturers, and everybody else. So you might want to look into joining them in Houston for the Texas Water Conference 2025. We, of course, will have that information for you on our events page. Nation, there is so much stuff on our events page. I only mention a few, but definitely go to scalinguph2o.com/events and figure out what you're going to do in 2025. And like I said, maybe you and I will meet each other. Well, Nation, I got so much great feedback from episode 397, which was all about answering your questions in a Pinks and Blues episode. And I shared on that episode, like I do just like every other episode when we're running tests. The slang term for that is called doing Pinks and Blues. So that's where this name comes from. I think I said it once years ago and it just stuck. And these seem to be some of the Scaling Up Nation's favorite episodes when I answer questions from the audience. Now, I've done this in various different ways. I've had you write in, and then I'll read your question, and I'll answer the question. And I've done like 10 or so different questions from the audience. I've had you log in to our website and record your message. And then I will play your voice asking your very question, and then I will answer that on the air. Well, then sometimes I get all these questions, and then what I do, I try to cobble them together into a coherent episode, answering at least a dozen questions. So some are similar, some are different. So that's what I'm going to do today. So listen carefully. You probably heard something that you asked that I have put together into this episode. But here's what's going on in this episode. And I know that this has happened. You have sold a new account in water treatment, and you go to bring your wares in there, and the customer says, "Hey, I've got this drum of competitor X's product. I've already paid for it. I don't want to have to pay to dispose of it," because a lot of times that goes away even if it isn't hazardous, but it goes away as hazardous waste. That costs money. So they want you to do two things. They want you to, one, take it back to your shop so you can get rid of it. And let me tell you, we were being so nice by talking with people and agreeing to take back whatever they had in their facility. And then when we moved our facility, we had so much, I'm using air quotes, junk. We had products that labels couldn't be read, all sorts of unusable things that people had given us, and we were being nice. Well, folks, that nice cost us and tens of thousands of dollars. I don't want to tell you the exact amount because it kind of makes me ill. We actually had to get rid of because we couldn't move it. We didn't have all the documentation and everything that we needed to properly move it with the DOT. So we had to pay a firm to come in and get rid of it. And if they don't know what it is, they're going to charge you hazardous waste, even though it was not hazardous waste. So take it from me, be polite to your customers, but you do not want to take that stuff back to your facility. The best thing to do is to use it where it lies. Where it's sitting, go ahead and use it. But I know that creates an issue because you've got all this information on your products. You've got experience with your products. I want to use my products. I sold this account. I know my products work. I want to show the customer how this account works on my products. I understand it, but what are you going to do with that leftover product? Chances are that product is perfectly fine. It's just different than what you are used to. It's got somebody else's label on it, but it is paid for normally by the customer and they want to get rid of it. So here's the question. And I answered about 3 questions in that diatribe that I just did. So if you heard your question in there, there it was. Some other people asked some questions. Okay, Trace, how do I know what is in that drum? I do want to go ahead and use it. Maybe it's a contract account. And now we can use that drum and we don't have to put additional costs with our products in there because we can properly manage what's already been paid for on site. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, I would argue that's the greenest and most sustainable thing that you can do because you're using stuff that's already shipped, that's already in place, that is already there. Why not use it? It just makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we figure out of our test kit how to actually dose that product. Now, if you get your product information out, you've got a material safety data sheet, and that tells you how old I am because we now call them safety data sheets. That just sticks with me. So the SDS, we've got that information. And normally section 11, 3 and 11 tells us what's about the product. 3 will tell us some general guidelines about what's in there, and then 11 tells us physical properties about the product. So that helps us, and we should have that with this mystery product that's there. Well, we don't know exactly what's in it. Normally on section 3, there's a range of, I'd say, between 3 and 11%. Well, that's a pretty big swing. We need to know how to dose it. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a dilution. Now, I talked about dilutions back in episode 397 when we were figuring out the best way to run our test. We're also figuring out that, hey, there might be some interference. There might be some accuracy issues. There might be some other reason that we want to dilute a sample. And I talked about that in episode 397. Today, we're also talking about dilutions, but this is where we're creating a dilution from a stock solution so we can test for it. So imagine if you would, we're walking into the mechanical room, there's our controller, there's where all of our products should be, and we've got some of the old suppliers' products there, and we want to see how we can use them. So we look at the inhibitor, we write down what the inhibitor's called. We take some information out of the safety data sheet. Typically, what are the primary components that are in there? Those will get you close. And I would encourage you, if you haven't done this, look up what's in section 3 of your SDS and see what those things do. And then you'll start becoming familiar with what the ingredients are and why they're in your product. So do that with this product. And even if you didn't know it was a scale and corrosion inhibitor, by looking up some of the items in section 3, you will instantly learn from the internet that that is a scale and corrosion inhibitor. Now, everybody thinks they have a special sauce. They have this secret concoction that's in a drum. Well, folks, nobody in water treatment has secret sauce. We are all slinging Thousand Island dressing. Now, there might be some more pickles in yours and more mayonnaise in mine, but it's still Thousand Island dressing, and we like to dress it up as secret sauce. But there are no secrets in water treatment. What there is experience. And having a product does not mean it's going to work well. Having a product and having the experience to use it properly, well, that's the determining factor. And that's why you listen to this podcast, because you're making sure that you're doing everything that you need to do to stay on top of your game. So what we're going to do right out of our test kit is we are going to make a dilution of that product that is on hand. And that way we can figure out how we need to dose for it. So I'm going to take you back to your chemistry days. Maybe it's been a while since you've been in chemistry class, but don't worry, you can definitely pay attention. So here is the dilution equation. C1 times V1 equals C2 times V2. C1 is the initial concentration of the solution. V1 is the volume of the solution at the initial concentration. C2 is the final concentration of the solution after dilution. And V2 is the final volume of the solution after dilution. So here it is again. C1 times V1 equals C2 times V2. And that's all we need to know in order to do a dilution. Now, what dilution should we do? Well, I recommend you do 100 ppm dilution. So I love Drop by Drop with James. James just recently did something on parts per million, and 1 parts per million is 1 automobile in a bumper-to-bumper traffic from Cleveland to San Francisco. So that's 1 part per million. 1 pancake in a stack of pancakes 4 miles high would be a part per million. 1 inch in 16 miles is a part per million. 1 minute in 2 years is a part per million. 1 ounce in 32 tons is a part per million. 1 cent in $10,000 is a part per million. And that's what we are going to use in order to figure out how to dose our product. But we're not going to use 1 part per million. We're going to use 100 part per million. You're probably saying, Trace, why are we using 100 parts per million? Well, because based on what we test out of 100, that will tell us our total percentage, because our total percentage, everything, all the sum of the parts added up equals 100. So if we have 100 ppm dilution of this product, and we get, say, 8 parts of phosphate in the system, well, that's 8% as phosphate. Now, I know that's relatively rough, and we don't know exactly the species. We can get pretty darn close out of our test kit, but we don't know exactly some of the species. But I'm telling you, I have done this for years. And by using this method, you are able to use the product up that's there successfully. And now you don't have to take it back to your shop and be somebody like me that has to pay a whole bunch of money to get rid of a bunch of stuff because we don't have the proper paperwork for it. Or you're making your customer so happy because they don't have to get rid of it. Or you're making your company's bottom line so happy because it's a contract account and you can now use someone else's product to service that contract. Folks, that is nirvana right there, especially if you do it properly. So I'm going to tell you how to set that up. This is how you would perform the procedure in the lab. And I want to say a couple things about the lab. If you have access to do this in a lab, you are always going to get better results. Well, why is that? Well, first off, there's no variables. Well, there are variables, but not like we have in the field. It's well lit. We don't have all this dirt and debris. We're not doing this procedure on top of an old drum. You get where I am going. Plus, we have equipment that resides in our lab that we would never have in our test kit. Specifically, 1,000 ml graduated cylinders. Those things are huge, or preferably a scale. So I'm going to talk about both methods, volumetrically doing this and doing this with a scale. And what we're doing a 1-step dilution of our product. We're going to call it product X to 100 ppm dilution. So straight product all the way to 100 ppm. So as I mentioned, what you're going to do, and this will be the scale method, and I like using a 1,000 ml Erlenmeyer flask because I can put a stir bar in that. I can tear out on the scale the Erlenmeyer flask and the stir bar, And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in zero point 0.1 grams of my product X, of my starting solution. So once I get zero point 0.1 grams, I'm then going to use my DI water and I'm going to dilute it all the way up to 1,000 grams. Once I do that, I take it off the scale, I put it right on my magnetic stirring pad, and I stir that guy up, and I now have 1,000 mLs of 100 ppm solution of product X. And we'll talk more about what you can do with that later. Now, let's say you don't have a scale that you can get down to 0.1 grams. Well, you're going to have to do that volumetrically, and now you're going to need a micro pipette. You need to pipette out 0.1 milliliters. You're going to put that into a 1,000 ml graduated cylinder, and then you're going to dilute that all the way up to 1,000 with your deionized water. And then normally you can't put a stir bar in those, so you're going to have to transfer that over to an Erlenmeyer flask with a stir bar, and you can stir that sucker up, and now you've got your solution there. Best way to do it is in the lab, and in my opinion, doing it by weight. However, this is expensive equipment. This is heavy equipment. This is large equipment. You are not going to have that in your test kit. And because of that, we're going to learn about serial dilutions. By the way, before we do that, for you math nerds out there, if you recall, we said it all started with C1 times V1 equals C2 times V2. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out C2, and C2 is going to be where our 100 ppm is. And if we set the equation up, essentially we're going to get 100 ppm equals our 1.1 gram of stock solution, or maybe that's 100 milligrams of stock solution in the numerator, over 1 liter of our distilled water, or 1,000 milliliters, however you decide to do that. So that's how you would set up that equation. So that equation, again, is C1 times V1 equals C2 times V2. Well, there you go, folks. You can just factor what it is that you need to know, and you can figure out any part per million from that. Or maybe you figure out how much volume you need to dilute to a certain part per million. So that's the dilution equation. You're going to be using that for this example. Now, I said the 1,000 mil graduated cylinder is way too bulky, and you probably don't have that in your test kit. But I am willing to bet you have a 100 milliliter graduated cylinder in your test kit. Most of us do. That's what I would recommend that you get from this. If you want to do some more math, you can do it with a 10, but folks, it's a little difficult to do it with a 10. I would suggest you get 100 there. And here's what you're going to need. You're going to need the solution that we're going to test, whatever product X is, your 100 mil graduated cylinder, and you got distilled water. I was surprised the other day. I was out in the field with somebody. They did not carry any DI water, deionized or distilled water in their test kit. How on earth do you dilute things? Because we have to dilute interferences out all the time, or maybe something like iron is above 3, and most of our tests only test to 3 parts per million. How are you going to get a sample reading unless you dilute that out? So if you don't have deionized water in your test kit, by all means, call your test kit supplier and go ahead and talk to them about getting one of those bottles. We carry 2 large bottles in our standard test kit, and then we're constantly checking to make sure the resin beads that are inside those bottles are still working properly. And we do that by testing conductivity. It should be as close to 0 as possible. So you have one of those. And then I love disposable pipettes for this that have the little graduation marks on it. And then if you want to rinse them out, you can. But if you want to just throw them away, you can do that as well. So those are the things that you are going to need in order to do this. Now, this is called a serial dilution because we're going to have to go through a series of dilutions in order to do what we did in the lab with just one step. Remember, that was zero point zero 0.01 grams or zero point zero 0.01 milliliters diluted up to 1,000 milliliters or 1,000 grams. Well, if you can do that, that's the easiest way to do that. If you can't because you don't have the graduated cylinder, you got to use what you have. And in this case, we have a 100 mil graduated cylinder. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pipette out and we're going to measure 1 ml of the solution that we are trying to dilute. And we're going to go ahead and put that in our empty and clean graduated cylinder. Folks, that's another reason to have DI water, because you need to make sure whenever you're testing something, you're not testing the system you tested an hour ago or maybe 3 weeks ago. You want to make sure that your testing apparatus is always clean. We have a procedure here at our office where we clean our test kits each and every week, and we actually have a special dishwasher that we set up that has a deionized water rinse. We use phosphate-free dish soap in it, and it just comes out so nice and clean. We do that each and every week to make sure that our glassware is staying nice and clean. But in between testing, we are making sure that we are at least triple rinsing the old samples out with DI water so we have nice, clean samples. So that goes without saying. We are putting the stock solution or the product in question into a nice, clean 100 ml graduated cylinder. So one more time for the procedure. I went ahead and I opened up with my PPE. I opened up the container. I got my pipette out. I measured 1 ml of that product. I then took my clean 100 ml graduated cylinder. I then dropped that 1 ml into that graduated cylinder. And now I'm going to take my DI water and I'm carefully going to fill the DI water in the graduated cylinder up to the 100 ml mark. That right there is a 10,000 ppm solution. That's what I just made there. And as we know, 10,000 is not 100. And by the way, there is a wrist technique that you need to master if you are in the field on how you mix samples. So in that graduated cylinder, you're going to use that wrist technique and you're going to mix up that sample to make sure it's uniform all the way through. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make 1,000 ppm solution. Now remember, we've got a 10,000 ppm solution, so we're going to dilute it down one more time. So the easiest way to do that is you're going to pour off 10 mils of your 10,000 ppm solution into a nice, clean, graduated cylinder that's 100 mLs in volume. And then you're going to take your DI water and you're going to fill that up all the way to 100 mLs. That's now going to give you a 1,000 ppm solution. We're not quite there yet. We need to go one more time in order to get 100 ppm. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take that 1,000 ppm solution now, whether you're using the same graduated cylinder or you have 3 of them, that's up to you. Once you make the solution, you can transfer those into a clean, marked sample bottle. And then if for some reason, when you do your field testing, there's not enough of whatever you're suspecting in that product to test for, you can test one of these higher ppm solutions to see if it's in it or not. So that's why I recommend you do it this way. And that way you've got one graduated cylinder that you're rinsing out really well in between these, and you've got some nice clean sample bottles that has 10,000 ppm on it and 1,000 ppm on it, because you can do a whole bunch of testing that way. So now we're going to take our 1,000 ppm solution sample into, let's say this is our clean, rinsed out 100 ml graduated cylinder. We're going to pour, just like before, 10 mils of our 1,000 ppm solution into our graduated cylinder. And then we're going to use our DI water and dilute it up to 100 mils. And folks, we just created a 100 parts per million solution. So there it is, folks. That's what we are trying to get to, the 100 ppm dosage, because that's going to tell us 100%. And we also have the higher strength dosage, so we can run tests on that too to really explore that product. So how cool was that? We went ahead and we made a dilution from a formula we probably haven't used since chemistry class. That's all C1 times V1 equals C2 times V2, where we are solving for C2, which is our final concentration. And then I took you through the special scenic route that I like to go through. So that way you have 3 different sets of sample that you can test for. Now, ideally, everything we test for is going to work out fine in that 100 ppm dilution. Now, you might say, Trace, 100 mils, that's not enough to do a lot of tests. Well, it's enough to do more than you think, but maybe you rinse a lot, maybe you're a sloppy pourer. So if you need to make more, hey, I shared the recipe with you. You can now make more. Now it's time to take out the tests that you want to run. Normally, I do all types of phosphate. I will figure out what my organic phosphate is, and then I will figure out what my total inorganic phosphate is, which means that's my poly and my orthophosphate. And that gives me a really good look at what this product is. And I write all that down. And remember, as I write it down, the parts per million we did was out of 100. So now that's my percentages as I start adding up to 100. After I do my phosphates, then maybe I'll look for something like azole. Whatever it is that you want to test for, go ahead and test for it. And here's what I like to do. Most likely, the product that you are going to bring in that account is very similar to the product somebody else brought into that account. So I use my product data sheet. And the way we write our product data sheets, that all the different things that we are testing for in that product, it tells us what the parts per million should be in the system. Now, it'll also tell us what to dose the product as in parts per million. I'm going to get there in a second. But right now, I'm just looking at all the ingredients that are in that product. So if you don't know what to test, just test for those same ingredients. And then write down what the numbers are. And all of those are out of 100 ppm. So we can look at it that's out of 100%. Now, using that same sheet, you can see if dosing that product at 100 ppm is within the range it's supposed to be based on your data sheet or not. And if it's not, you now need to concentrate that dosage up so many times to bring it up to where you want that product held. So maybe you need to concentrate it up 10 times. Well, if you did that, you've actually got that sample in that other sample bottle that you did. You can test that, and it should match exactly what your product bulletin says. Maybe it's somewhere in between that, but now you get the gist, and you see why it's so easy to bring things to 100 parts per million, because now it's super easy math. Now it's just how many times do I need to multiply out the dosage to equal what was in my product or how I want to dose that. So let's say we figure out it's a 450 parts per million as dosing product. Well, folks, you just set that up on your controller. You go ahead and set your pump up in your controller to feed a 450 ppm dosage rate product. And now you can properly use the product that somebody left behind, and you didn't have to bring it back to your warehouse and pay this crazy fee because you decide to get a bigger warehouse space someday. And you are shocked by how much it costs to get rid of all this stuff that you were just being nice, saying that I will take it. Or you can tell the customer, don't worry, you don't have to get rid of it on your own. I will use it for you because I am such a good water treater I understand the dilution equation. I understand the math. And in fact, I have all the materials right here in my test kit. I can figure this out today. And then, of course, the third reason is maybe this is a contract account, and now we don't have to bring product in because we can use somebody else's product. And that goes straight to the bottom line, where your employer can do things like send you to one of those seminars that we talked about in the beginning of this show. Or maybe you're going to go to the Association of Water Technologies training this year. Well, where does that money come from? It comes from you knowing how to properly manage your accounts. And when you can use product that's just going to be waste and it's working just fine, you're going to verify that later. You are helping everybody out. And now you're going to get to attend the AWT technical training and you get to meet me, all because of this procedure. Nation, this is math, this is chemistry, and this is what puts you above other water treaters, because you are able to work a magic that others think is magic. No, it's not. It's just math and chemistry. And once again, I'm just going to do a quick synopsis. So again, if you want the math, it is C1 times V1 equals C2 times V2. And then with that base equation, we simply factor out what is it we are trying to accomplish, and we solve the equation. You can just plug everything in. I told you how we got to a 100 ppm dilution, and we did that with several dilutions. We started out making a 10,000 ppm dilution that was 1 mil of our sample product, diluted in 100 mils of DI water. That gave us 10,000 ppm. Then our second dilution was we took that 10,000 ppm solution. We took 10 mils of that in our graduated cylinder, and then we diluted that up to 100 mLs in our graduated cylinder with DI water. That gave us a 1,000 ppm solution. And then we took that 1,000 ppm solution, we poured 10 mils of that into our 100 mil graduated cylinder, and then diluted that up to 100 mLs, giving us 100 ppm solution. And then we ran all of our tests, we took good notes, and we were able to do exactly what it was that we were setting out to do. So I really want to thank all the people that wrote in some sort of question that I went ahead and cobbled into this content. It was about 11 people that went ahead and wrote in, and somehow I answered your question in one way or another. Folks, I got to say, I would not be able to do shows like this. I don't know where the ideas would come from. So please keep your questions coming. We are going to hit 400 on our episode numbers next week. 400 episodes. And our little secret is, when I first got into podcasting, I thought it would be fun to make up my numbers. So I had 11, 11.1, 11.2. And we have way more than 400 episodes out there. But for fun, we're just going to say that there are 400 episodes out there. And Nation, I could not do that without each of you listening to this podcast, without all of you trying to figure out, how do you send information to Trace to make sure that he is talking about the right stuff? And how do I share this with somebody so the podcast can get to critical mass, so it really makes a difference in the water treatment industry? And Nation, I want to thank all of you for doing that. I have no doubt that the Scaling Up Nation has reached critical mass. There's so many things that I hear when I go to conferences where people tell me they listen to this podcast, or maybe they got a certification because they were motivated by this podcast. Maybe they learned about this industry because somebody shared this podcast with them. Whatever it is, that is the whole reason that we have the Scaling Up H2O podcast, is to just make the entire water industry better. And not only is this podcast doing that, you are helping us do that. So Nation, thank you for allowing me to do math on a podcast. I know I always get nervous whenever I do math on a podcast, but so many people ask for it. I guess you like it. I would love it if the next time you saw me, you said, "Hey, Trace, I had a mystery product. I did the dilution that you mentioned on the show, and I was able to figure out exactly what I needed to dose that product at." Folks, I've been doing this for years. You're going to get close. You're going to have to guess on some of the materials, like I said, because you're not going to know exactly the species. But normally, we're not talking about a lot of product there because anybody that's managing an account properly, they're not going to leave a bunch of product at an account. They're going to go take that and use that where they can make use of it. But if they do leave it behind, I gave you 3 good reasons why you need to use it up in place. And now you know how to do that. So I hope you learned something new today. And if you want to learn something else, here is a new Drop by Drop with James.
Welcome to Drop by Drop with James, the podcast segment where we wonder, explore, think about, imagine, and learn industrial water treatment. You guessed it, drop by drop. Together. In today's episode, I have a challenge for you.
Challenge accepted.
The challenge is check your safety equipment. Seriously, check the condition as well as any expiration dates. I personally was shocked to find out that hard hats have an expiration date on them, but they do. It does make sense though because plastic can get brittle over time, especially sitting in a hot vehicle. Brittle plastic probably won't protect your noggin as well as it should. Are your safety glasses all scratched up or dirty? Do they obstruct your view? Do you wear your earplugs more than once, and do they need to be replaced? How about your steel-toed shoes, face shields, aprons, gloves, and other safety equipment? Will they protect you when you need them to? Take this challenge as your excuse to inspect them all and replace them as needed. Your family, friends, colleagues, Trace, and I all want you to be safe as you practice the noble profession of industrial water treatment. I'm James McDonald, and I want to encourage you to be like water by forming bonds with those around you, dissolving new knowledge, and making worthy ripples, drop by drop.
Scaling Up Nation, 1 week left in the year 2024. Make sure it's a great week. And one of the ways you can make that a great week is by tuning in next week to the 400th episode of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. Have a great week, folks. Are you ready to take your water treatment career to the next level? Get the confidence you need to sign up for the Certified Water Technologist exam today by taking our Certified Water Technologist prep course. Learn valuable tools and techniques to help you succeed. Plus, test your knowledge with our 100-question practice exam. Visit scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep and put yourself on the fast track to certification. Don't wait, start today.